Skyscraper. That's what we're going to be talking about this evening. Project Skyscraper, for those of you who don't know, was a project that came out back at AIA in June. That was when the announcement came. But it's actually been in process for 2.5 years. Been working on this, this new project. Now basically, the concept sort of stemmed from really the users. Most of the time when we talk to customers about what are the things you hate most about Revit, that list is incredibly long, but at times we find very common points. And one of them is in the way that we coordinate, right? The way that we communicate with one another. Now, for some people, we're taking advantage of things like Revit Server. Who's using Revit Server? Awesome. Some people are using WAN acceleration tools, whether it's new products like Panzura and some of the things they're offering, or Riverbed solutions. But ultimately, in most cases, it still sort of falls short. We still find ourselves beating our heads against the desk when we want to work from home, which I know you all love to do. We want to work remotely, when we want to work from a hotel, or we just want to be on the job site and work on an existing Revit model. Those pieces can be incredibly complicated. So for us at Autodesk, when we're looking at how we solve a problem, we realize that there's more to it than just increasing your load times from Central, or ensuring that local files update quicker. It's got to be more than that. And ultimately, when we sort of sold the concept of BIM, when that was brought to the industry, and obviously it wasn't brought by Autodesk, but when that concept came to play, and when Autodesk sort of tried to answer that with Revit, we had a lot of promises. We said it was going to do this and it was going to do that, and we've lived up to that in some cases. But collaboration, we've just missed the mark in some instances. And this is really our response to that. Now, ultimately for us, the two areas that we're most focused in is examining the way that people work today on a desktop and/or laptop, whichever you're using. And then even more so than that, sort of redefining how we locally collaborate. Now, we want to do that in two ways. The first thing is we need to really re-examine our client base. So at Autodesk, we're re-examining how our clients and customers work on a day-to-day basis. And also, we really wanted to explore how social sharing occurs. So when we're communicating on a day-to-day basis, what does that look like? What are teams and firms and organizations doing to get their messaging out, to collaborate about changes that are occurring on the project? So we've done a lot of that. So let's talk about some of that research. The first thing that we've noticed is that obviously the communication that exists between different firms is very different and in some cases disconnected. The reason for this in most cases is firms operate a lot of times in sort of a silo, if you will. It's not to say that we don't communicate, but a lot of times the actions that we make either on a model or a project are very specific to our organization. And then we're using repositories like Dropbox or BoxNet or FTP sites we set up, and we're hoping that everyone's continually checking those updates. We also find that in some cases the way firms work with projects is different. Where some firms may be interested in working in a typical desktop setting, others are working in mobile environments. So we really needed to understand that piece. The other really important item is that the idea of a central model would lead you to believe that the model is centrally located. And at the moment, in most cases, for those of you using Revit Server, it might be on a server in a different office. For some of you, it might be in one firm's location and you're VPNing in to take advantage of it. There's nothing centralized in most cases when we work in a large-scale project. Now, when we work in a smaller project, when we work in a scenario where we're all working within a firewall, even in those settings, even though ideally we're on one server and we're all able to ping that continual server, we're having to, in some cases, work outside of the office. So in those cases, we don't have a centralized access to the file. We're, again, having to VPN. We're having to really find workarounds. So basically, this is what prompted, having this sort of basic analysis, this is what prompted Project Skyscraper. This is what prompted us to start thinking differently about how we share and communicate information. And in that analysis, we selected 5 beta partners. This is where it's sort of important to explain how this process has changed a bit. At Autodesk, and for many of you, I'm guessing some of you have beta tested our products before, or been invited to beta test. Cool. What's interesting about the way the beta program works today is we invite you, or you ask to be invited, either or. And in most cases, we give you a list of features and we say, hey, tell us what you think about these features. Now, in some cases, we get really great feedback. This worked, this aired out, this was a problem, whatever the case may be, we get some of that feedback. But in a lot of scenarios, either we don't hear anything, that's probably the most common, and then the secondary to that is we just get a list of why you didn't add this feature, why didn't you add this, where is this at? A lot of times we don't really get that true beta test until we release the product, whenever that happens. We release the product, you use it for 6 months, and then we send out a service pack fixing all the errors. Probably should have caught in the beta program, right? So that's not going to work for a product like Skyscraper. What we're going to be showing you here is a completely different way of sharing models. So for us, just rolling this out and hoping we catch the errors was not going to solve the ultimate issue. So we selected 5 partners that represent completely different aspects of architecture, engineering, design, and 5 completely different project types. The other thing that we did differently is we assigned a dedicated resource for each one of those project teams to ensure that we're making sure they're getting positive feedback, we're making immediate changes, we're really staying up to speed with adaptations and errors we find. So the first type of project we worked with, the first type of beta test we worked with is what we thought was called a team project. So this is, in this idea of a team project, it's a single location, and then even more so than that, that single location is working within one firewall. This user base is probably taking advantage of just standard Revit work sharing, so setting up a central model on their server and working sort of congruently throughout that office. The next project type we worked with was an enterprise account. And the enterprise account was different from tester to tester, but ultimately the idea is that this had either multiple locations, they had multiple firm locations, and or they were working with multiple partners. Ideally, they were currently taking advantage of things like Revit Server or Vault. I think in all scenarios, they were either using some sort of WAN acceleration as well. So we wanted to make sure that what we were doing was better, or at the very least, the same as what they're currently working with, so we could improve from there. The thing that we found out, though, the thing that really came to sort of our attention when we analyzed these types of groups, is that firms don't silo themselves into either one of these categories. Most firms change based on the project they've been awarded. So if the budget's big enough to add a satellite office, they add a satellite office. If they need to bring on new staff, they add new staff. It really just depends on the type of project they're working on. If external partners are needed, they add external partners. There's not one sort of title we can assign to any one design firm, because anyone's going to be nimble based on the project they've been sort of awarded, if you will. So the software that we needed to come up with, the solution we needed to come up with, had to do more than just solve a problem for a specific group, and that's really where Skyscraper came into play. So Project Skyscraper, we have this really cool graphic. This is probably the last time I get to show this deck, so brand new deck rolling out in a couple of weeks. So Project Skyscraper got announced at AU last week, and it was officially released on Monday, on December 7th. So you can purchase it today. If you brought credit cards, you can just do that on the way out. It also has a new name. It's super short and simple. It's called Collaboration for Revit. Hopefully that'll change or something. Autodesk 360 Collaboration for Revit. So that's the long, elongated name for it. Much nicer, shorter than Skyscraper. So the Collaboration for Revit piece is what we'll be talking about today. We'll show you kind of how this works. What's interesting about this is really pay attention to that word collaborate. That's probably the more important piece than for Revit, because as I'm showing you how this add-in works in the Revit interface, I'm hoping you'll start to see how this might also work with other applications, not just Revit. So pay attention to that as we work through it. But ultimately what Project Skyscraper and now Collaboration for Revit, the concept behind it is that we can continue working in Revit exactly the way we do today. However, we're changing the location of our central model. Ultimately, we're taking this model and we're bringing it into a cloud-based environment. So this is a big gulp. Everyone's sort of interested to see how we're going to do this. What's the lifeblood behind Project Skyscraper and this cloud solution? Well, I'm sure most of you have heard of Autodesk 360 at this point, right? That name's come about. So Autodesk 360 has an interesting sort of lifespan in Autodesk's hierarchy of products. Came out about 2 to 3 years ago. You started hearing that name. For many of you, it may have just been a Dropbox site. For some of you, it's a place to use cloud credits. For some of you, it might be a repository. It really has changed depending on your type of user interaction. Most of you probably have an A360 account, and if you don't think you have an A360 account, try your Autodesk user ID. It probably opens up an A360 account. So in working with A360, we sort of viewed this as a really great opportunity to take that application and really turn it into the umbrella product that we always thought it would be. Ultimately, A360 is going to empower us to not just work with Revit, but other products like Inventor, AutoCAD, you name it. All of our products have this sort of connection to A360. Now, in thinking about A360 as maybe a cloud repository as opposed to just an FTP exchange site, we started changing sort of the way that it would connect to Revit, and more important than that, the way that it can converse with a specific project. So using this new A360 portal with collaboration for Revit, we've empowered users to now work within the cloud with a central model regardless of whether or not they have multiple locations or if they're involving multiple firms. Some of the key benefits here is there's no IT setup required, there's no hardware to purchase. You simply enable the ability to use this A360 feature, and you now can invite anyone that also has these same permission settings. And when I say anyone, I mean anyone. You can enable partners outside of your network. You can enable people in other countries. I mean, you really can expand your network to include a lot of parts and pieces here. Now, in addition to that, we've also overhauled Revit slightly. Inside of our Revit user interface now, on the Collaborate tab, you're going to notice a new tool. This has actually been changed from the word share to collaborate. You'll see that when we pop into Revit in just a few moments. But now by selecting the Collaborate tool, we're going to be prompted with a dialog box that asks us if we want to save our central model in A360 or if we want to use our local area or WAN connection. Now, if we specify A360, we also get this really great team feature. This allows us to invite other A360 users to our project. Now, what's also nice about this is we can see information. So this is actually Matt Damon up here. So Matt Damon's an architect for Acme Architects, and he can invite anyone. Notice he's invited interior designers, structural engineers. And what's really great about this invitation is it comes with a lot of different features. He now has the ability to do direct team chat, so he can directly chat to any user inside the project. He can do team chatting. He also has the ability to share screenshots inside of Revit. He can reference specific elements and reference different views in this workflow. What's also nice about these chat features is regardless of whether or not he's working in a specific project, let's say he had 4 or 5 projects going on, while he's in this Collaborate tab, he can do any of these items regardless of whether or not he has that project open. So you're able to collaborate regardless of whether or not you're working in the active project that someone wants to communicate with you on. Now, in addition to these little features, we've also brought, for those of you that aren't aware of WorkShare Monitor, it's an add-in subscription tool, we've added that to the Collaborate tab as well. Some of the advantages of this, we can see when people are syncing. We also have the ability to see if there was any issues, like for instance, if a Save to Central failed. And for those of you that have ever wondered, when you do a synchronize with Central, there's that little item that says comment. If you go ahead and add a comment, that comment prompts you now, so you can say what you were up to inside of the model. It also has an activity feed, and I'll show you that in just a few moments, so you can actually see when people have most recently entered the model, exited the model. Just sort of a checks and balances, if you will. If someone said they worked all weekend and no activity to prove for it, you have that. The next piece we'll talk about here is just A360, and I'm going to blow through these last few slides so we can actually see the product working. But ultimately, inside of our A360 portal, we've completely overhauled what this tool has the ability to do. So inside of A360, not only are we able to save Revit models, but we're also able to store email communication, add, for instance, drawing markups. We can add different competitive products. In fact, we can view all sorts of file types that don't even fall under the Autodesk banner. I can open up a PowerPoint, I can view a PDF, and very soon I'm going to be able to also add markup features to that. Now when I open up the portal, we've made some changes to the way the user interface looks on A360. We sort of social mediaized it, if that makes sense. Similar in some cases to products like LinkedIn and others. The other nice piece about this is we can add a project activity feed, so any of our contacts, regardless of whether or not they work in our firm or external, as long as they have that A360 ID, we can see different activity feeds that they want to show us. So if they were at an event like this and they wanted to write an excellent comment about the presenter this evening, they could do that here and it would prompt up in the activity feed. The other feature we have is the ability to be project specific, so we can add product pages. And inside these project pages, we can add any number of users. We can manage recent data that they've uploaded. And we also get real-time posts. So as people make comments, we're able to see those posts immediately. Now to take that a step further, the items that they post, if they included something like a Revit model, we have the ability to view that Revit model natively right inside of the A360 browser. And I want to make sure I'm very clear. It's not converting it to a DWF. It's not saving it out in another format. When we sync to Central, when we sync the model, we then can open that model natively in A360. I'll show you what that looks like in just a few moments. Now, in addition to being able to do that, I am going to point one thing out. I can't say a lot about it, but because they made the slide, I also want you to see something that says Edit in Revit Online. So for those of you that do beta testing, you'll notice that a lot of times when you use the beta program, it gives you an option to view that beta program online. So you can actually use Revit Online as an example. I don't have timelines or deadlines on when some of those features might be available, but pay close attention to that type of an offering. Now when we go ahead and view a Revit model, so not editing, but we want to view the Revit model, we actually now use the Showcase render engine to instantly view that file. You'll also notice that it prompts the sheets. So when I sync to Central, not only is my 3D view viewable that I can walk through, create views, but I also can examine any of those sheets, and we'll do that in just a few moments. The other nice piece is that all of this has also been added to our iPad. So our iPad now has the same accessibility to A360 as our desktop or our Windows Explorer browser, Chrome, whichever you use. So if we wanted to view drawings, we want to view a 3D model, if we want to view our activity feed, we can do that right from our iPad and or Android tablet. We also can receive notifications right on our smartphone. Now some of the smartphones, the iPhone, and I believe most of the Android devices also have an app as well. So those you can actually set up notifications. Some of the viewing modes don't exist in the same way, mainly because of screen size. But you can receive notifications in any one of these portals. I'm going to go ahead and pop into the actual program. Let's see if it's... So it went into presenter mode.
See how there was. You have it up there.
There we go. Let me change this to... There we go. I'm going to go ahead and pop into Revit. Whoa. Screen is crazy. Now inside of Revit, I want you to sort of see two new things. One of the first things is that I've got this new tab over here called Communicator. I'm also going to point out to you on the Collaborate tab some changes. So on the Collaborate tab, it said Share in that picture. You notice now it says Communicator in this list. But I do want you to pay close attention. Work sets, central model, reload latest, all of that's exactly the same. So we're not changing the way that you work with a central model. We're simply changing its location. Now the other nice piece is that over here in our Communicator, we can view a few different things. We can view any of the participants that are currently active in this model. So right now you'll notice by this little green dot that I'm the only one that's currently active. However, you're also going to notice at the top that I have a few different options. So right here is my Projects button. And you'll notice that I have an option called Active Project. That's currently the project I'm working in. And I also have an All Projects window. So any project that I've created inside of A360, I can browse through. Now what's nice about this is, as an example, let's say I found another project. I'll grab like a samples project. There's a better one, Becoming an Industry Expert project. You'll notice that when I do this, I have a few options. I can either chat directly with this entire group, and I also have an email communication option. So I can go ahead and select email, and what's nice is it'll go right to Outlook, add all of those contacts, and I can send a quick email to that group associated with that specific project. Now, in addition to being able to email, I also have that chat ability, but I can do this in two ways. The first way is I can browse through contacts that I've added to Collaboration for Revit. As an example, I'll go ahead and look at frequent contacts, and you'll notice that one of my colleagues, Joe, is currently online. So if I wanted to, I could right-click here. I could either email him or I could chat with this contact. So you'll notice that recently I sent him a message just saying, hey Joe, did you see the updated print for engineering? And this Joe responded, I did, as a matter of fact, looks good, approved. So we have that ability to have some basic communication. Now in addition to that, I can have really hundreds of chats going at any given time specific to this Revit project. Now I could be more deliberate than that too. You'll notice that I also have project chats that are going on. So these project chats are a bit different. I can really communicate on a number of things. So I've got just a sort of a plethora of information that's going on up here. I'm going to bring this down a bit. The really nice enhancement here though, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in just on a portion of this building. And as an example, I might say, let's say I was going to make an adaptation to this slab. I'm just going to go ahead and say edit boundary. I'm going to make a quick move. Say finish. Now what I'm also going to do is I'm going to go ahead and at the bottom here do what's called a screen cap. Notice the screen goes dark, and then from there I'm going to go ahead and just take a quick image of this. I'll say capture. And then what I'm going to do is in my project board here, I'm going to say and I'll send that out to the team. Now at any moment the team can go ahead and select that image, and it's going to allow them to see that image, hopefully in a better quality than what we see up here. But I also have the ability to go ahead and do a quick sync now that I've done this. I'm going to go ahead and select Synchronize with Central. Before I do that, I'm going to switch to the activity feed. I'll select Synchronize with Central. And from here, I'm going to go ahead and add a comment to this specific central model. Now it's worth noting everything I'm doing right now, I'm doing over a Wi-Fi broadband card. So not great internet connection. I think I had two bars, maybe three. So I'm going to go ahead on this comment section. I'm just going to say slab. Say OK. Now from here, the software is going to go ahead and sync the model. But where it's syncing it is in a very different location. It's not syncing it to my local drive or my local desktop. It's actually syncing it right here to my A360 account. So that project that I was working from is this Autodesk TS Collaboration project. And these are the team members that are currently collaborating. Now they may be collaborating in different ways. The three people that we looked at on my project were only on the architectural model. Some of these other partners are engineering focused. So Ryan and John are. And Caesar's more of a construction specialist in this case. So you'll notice that in some cases I may want them in certain aspects of the model, but maybe not every case. So I'm only talking in that Revit model with architectural folks. Now the nice part about this, while that's syncing, I can actually view recent syncs. So Scott synced just a little while ago. And as an example, I'm going to go ahead and select Scott's Revit model. I'm going to pick Autobahn. Now you'll notice that Scott actually made a comment here, uploaded version 2. Scott actually didn't need to make that comment. You'll notice that right up here at the top, it automatically version controls all of our models that we work on. Now the beauty of this is that it's not only versioning if we make large holistic changes, but every time we sync, it's automatically creating a log version of that file. So if I wanted to roll back from someone that synced and maybe made an inappropriate change, or it didn't work with the overall model, I can roll back with that version control. Now I also have the ability right inside of this A360 project to view the model in a few different ways. So I can, obviously I can zoom in. I can select components, and you'll notice that all of those components carry along their Revit parametrics. I also have some interesting features, like just as an example, let's say I wanted to have a little bit of fun here. I've got a feature called Explode. And what this allows me to do is blow the Revit model apart and then select, maybe more interior-based components or items that I might have difficulty finding. Now, in addition to being able to interact with a 3D component, I also am going to have that ability to interact with 2D or sheets. So one of the nice parts is because this model is synced, I can do a list view, and any of the sheets that were generated are also viewable here. So as an example, I could go ahead and look at the finished plan, and it's going to let me see and browse that sheet. Now, one of the reasons that a lot of people never took to products like Design Review as an example is because the way they explain it to us is, all right, now I have to export to a DWF, and then I'm going to redline markup when ultimately I'm going to print this out as a PDF. So for me, having those secondary exchanges of information is just not valuable. So our thought is by just simply empowering people to sync to central and having access to this information, users will now be able to take advantage of some of our DWF features, like for instance the ability to select 2D-based components and view some of those same parameters. So for those individuals that maybe don't care about Revit or aren't interested in learning how to do 3D modeling, they still have that ability to interact with those products. Now it's worth mentioning that we're also adding a 2D markup feature to this tool set. So for those of you that have had a chance to look at one of our apps called AutoCAD 360, we recently rolled out a new markup tool. That'll be joining this product line very soon. Now in addition to being able to do markups, we also have the ability to share information. So I can share these items. I also have the ability to do things like, for instance, copy or alert me to changes that might occur to specific views and or sheets. So a lot of functionality in just sort of maintaining the day-to-day documentation. Now I'm going to go ahead and X out of here. I'm going to zoom back over into my Revit file. Notice my sync's complete. And you'll also notice when my sync's complete, that comment that I listed right there, updated slab, is now showing what changes I made to that specific model. So basically the idea is that we're just sort of relocating that central discussion into a cloud-based environment. Now I want to show you, because some of this is sort of pre-set up for you. It works really well because I've sort of canned it. I'm going to go ahead and close out of this project. And I'm going to start a brand new project. Now I just want you to see sort of the basic setup that goes along with this. If I go ahead and navigate back to that Collaborate tab once more, you'll notice that I have that feature again, Communicator and Collaborate. Now if I select Collaborate, it's going to prompt me and tell me I need to save this file somewhere. So I'll just save it on my local drive. I'll put it right on the desktop. And we've got about 100 of these project ones. So we do like project 68. That sounds good. Save. And now from there, I'm going to get this new prompt. And this is where it's asking us, do I want to collaborate within my network, so work in a traditional manner, or do I want to collaborate using A360? Now, if I specify using A360 and say OK, it's going to give me a second prompt. And this prompt's going to ask me to pick which project in my A360 account I want to use. So as an example, I'll go ahead and hit select. And if I wanted to, I could pick that Autobahn TS collaboration project. I then could say initiate. And by doing this, it's going to go ahead and generate the central model. Now, the process that goes along with it, this is pretty interesting. It's just simply going to tell me that it's starting the work sharing, modeling, and creating. It's uploading the model to A360. And then it's going to save the model to local cache. Now, what's interesting about this is when this is complete, the file we set up is my local file. This isn't a central model. I don't have to save or close out. This is now my local file. So if I wanted to, I can begin working, syncing with central, and inviting new guests whenever I feel like it. The model's automatically going to be set up inside of my A360 account, so we'll see that in just a few moments. Project 68 is listed there, and I can invite any number of users that I want. Now, while this goes, I'll just tell you a little bit about how this is set up. Currently, the way that this software works is an add-in package for Revit 2015. So we go ahead and purchase the add-in package for this, and it then enables your user ID for your specific user that wants to take advantage of these A360 features. It's worth noting that this is a named user licensing model. However, as an admin, you have the ability to move that user to any different user throughout your company. So if today you needed 10 people on project A to have access to Collaborate for Revit, but tomorrow you only needed 5 of them to maintain that, you need 5 in another location, you can reallocate that license into any of your users. Now, the other nice piece about this is that we can also convert existing projects that aren't set up using Collaborate for Revit. I can convert any project, whether it has work sets in place or not. I can simply migrate those by changing the central model location to A360. You'll notice by hitting close, I've now set this project up, and I now have the ability to sync. Now inside my active model, I haven't really set up any communication, but that's sort of the gist of it laid out. Before I go into too much more, because we covered a lot really quick there, I want to go ahead and open the floor for some Q&A and see if we can't answer some questions that you guys might be having.
I got one. Oftentimes, my company is going to act on behalf of a larger company, and they want that to be seamless.
Sure.
Or the companies I work with are actually shipping work overseas, and they want that to be seamless.
Right.
How would that affect this? That's where they don't want all those other faces or entities identified.
Sure.
Can it funnel through one point of contact?
It can, yeah. So the way that the admin's set up is basically defined by the start of the project. So if you wanted the larger firm to sort of run the global central model, if you will, from there they can invite those users and everyone can sort of work under their hub, if you will, for A360. So it would look like the larger company the entire time, and you guys are accessing as needed. You also could work entirely in one model. If, let's say, you were all working from an architectural perspective, you wouldn't have to have segmented models. Or you could, tackle a typical linking feature if you wanted to link in separate models. So you have that discretion as well. But I think to answer your question, yes, you can be much more holistic and make it specific to that team if you wanted to. Does that answer your question?
I think so, because the deal is the other clients typically don't want exposure that they're depending on these other outsources.
Right.
And that's the big issue.
In some cases, we create different hubs inside of our A360 account. So let's say they wanted the owner to have access to a version of this. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll create secondary hubs. Consider that different projects, if you will, but really what a hub is it defines communication within specific groups. So if they wanted a series of communication to be between them and all of their partners, they can have that. They can also create a copy of that, if you will, that eliminates a portion of that to only include themselves and the partners that they want to have owner-facing.
Okay.
So you can be very deliberate about who sees what.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah.
I've got 2 of them. One of them, I saw in the ability to, when you publish, or when you sync with Central, to have the sheets show up. Is there a way to mark some of those sheets as being like part of a contractual issue? Like these are the sheets, this is the model that has the sheets that went out as 50%
Sure.
CDs or whatever.
Sure. So today there's not, but when we add the markup feature, one of the things that we are going to be able to do is add not just individual sheet comments, but holistic set comments, if you will. So comments to a grouping of your sheets A, B, and C. So we can be a little bit more deliberate in that type of a comment, if you will. For now, all you'd be able to do is add I think you kind of saw it here, Scout's model that's uploaded. Let's see here. For now, all you're going to be able to do is add holistic comments to this entire set, and or copy specific views. So if you found a sheet that you wanted to send a specific note out to, you could do that. We do have a product that offers something similar to that. It's called Field, but it's a little bit more construction administration.
Okay. My other question was, sometimes when you publish a model, there's data attached to the elements that you would just as soon not have out there because you don't want people clicking on it and asking questions.
Right.
Is there a way to hide that stuff?
So right now, we don't have the ability to hide parametrics, but I think I've given this presentation probably 20 or 30 times, and I get that question probably a third of the time. So I'm not the only one. The one thing I will tell you is that we are working on administrative rights from a ability to download the model, ability to access certain aspects of the model. I don't know how much of that's going to be parametric driven as far as what the properties are, but it's a good question. I just don't have a good answer, I'm sorry. Yeah, other questions? Okay.
The chat feature is interesting, but is there a way to, I guess, legitimize it so that I can come back later and say, Bob, you said at this date to do X and you haven't done it?
Sure, to almost like add a task, if you will.
Or more, I mean, to be able to put it, you know, like file an email somewhere and to be able to report back in 3 months when Bob hasn't done what he said he's supposed to do.
Sure. So as far as adding, you know, what's the right word? You know, I guess from another vantage point of view, like a CYA piece of it versus a, you know, making sure you're holding people accountable. Those two components. Right now, you think of it as more of like a global chat, but ultimately the idea is, you'll kind of see this here. With Collaborate, we're attaching both a calendar and a task-driven assignment. So let's say, as an example, someone was to make a comment and say, you know, I plan to have all structural set by 2 o'clock Friday morning. The idea would be that it would add a calendar date associated to that comment. So you'd have the ability to, your QA, QC, whether or not that goal is attained. For the moment, that doesn't exist, though. But I should share with you, I kind of preface at the beginning. Right now, it says Collaborate for Revit. Ultimately, the goal is for Collaborate to be a part of not only Revit, but also the workflow within A360, AutoCAD, all of our product lines, to really make it its own sort of separate entity. So I'll tell you right now, the collaboration piece, the chat piece, is a little bit young. It's sort of developing. In fact, it's changed a lot from September to today. So I guess I'd say keep your eyes open. I definitely think it's going to evolve in that way. It's just I don't have a timeline, unfortunately. But it's a good comment.
Is the chat saved anywhere?
Right now, you do have the ability to save it. What's nice about the chat, though, is that it's completely separate from the model. So any chat that occurs, if you save the model out, you don't have to worry about the customer seeing all the comments as you're working on Saturday night, right? So that piece is nice. We can segment the piece, and we can archive them. Other questions?
What about, you mentioned other platforms, so I'm going to speak specifically with regards to fabrication.
Sure.
Now, with the fabrication challenges we sometimes have is when the work comes to us, the databases, specifically to what used to be Map Software Solutions that was acquired by Autodesk,
Yeah.
that's something we have to get access to before we engage. Is there any thought of having those tools available in this form?
In this form. So the collaboration piece, yes. The A360 piece, definitely.
Okay.
So right now, we're working with all of our product lines. Most of them have added A360 functionality. I'm trying to think of the ones that don't at this point. Some of our fabrication tools are still being Autodesk, Autodeskified. I don't know what's the right way to say that, but they're being, the GUI's being updated, the ribbons being updated, all of those things are being added. So there's a little bit of a waiting game. I would say, coming into the new product releases, you're going to see some of those enhancements. But the answer is yes. Every product is going to have the ability to interface with A360 as well as individual projects to ultimately add some of that collaboration that we think is sort of missing. That is a good point. So part of the dilemma we run into with collaboration, even as we were building this product line, there's collaboration within Revit. That's one piece, right? That's one hurdle. The other thing that a lot of people struggle with is collaboration with our other applications within Revit. So things like Civil 3D, which should work perfectly with Revit. And there's obviously limitations. We're starting to focus on how can we sort of alter those products to make them more interchangeable so we don't have those disconnection, if you will. So the answer is yes. With the fabrication piece, we actually have a new overlay team dedicated to working with some of those workflows.
Yeah, because that whole database, that's something unique to that product.
Exactly, yeah. And the content that comes along with some of that is just as valuable to Revit users as it is to the fabrication teams.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Does it work across dual screens so you can maximize your workspace?
Revit doesn't. I mean, well, you can command Revit and have it go across 2 screens, but you can, for that collaboration piece, I'll go ahead and do this. I can pull the communicator just like I would with any tab. Someone asked me this today. I thought it was kind of an interesting question. Let me see if I can get this to work. We pulled it to a secondary screen, but the other thing we did is we stacked the properties, project browser, and communicator 3 high on the off chance that you're using a vertical display. So yes, you can move it around. But
Okay, so you can move that to a second screen.
Exactly.
Because I know it's the
Expand
first
it,
thing my
make
users
it
do.
huge. Yeah. Screen real estate, we don't want to chew it up even more.
Can you work on your local Revit and still sync with these, or do you have to go through the
Let me make sure I understand that question a little bit. So, can I work locally with the file without a web connection and then update to central?
Yeah.
So the answer is yes and no. If I don't have connection to the central model and I'm borrowing elements and someone else is borrowing the same elements, there's a disconnect. If I, as an example, were to lose internet connection and continue working, I'm first off going to be notified immediately that I've lost internet connection. But I can continue working if I'd like. However, just like anything else, if someone else were to borrow the same element, it's going to ask me to reload latest before it'll prompt that component. With that being said, because this has happened with some of our beta testers, if you disconnect from central, so let's say the internet connection goes down, we do have the ability to move the central model to a LAN connection, to your standard server. And the nice part about it is because we're not using unique identifiers to share information anymore, it's still going to allow us to sync to that new central location, as long as the file name doesn't change. So yes, you can. I would recommend that you either reestablish that internet connection though, and or move it to a LAN, so that way everyone can continue syncing. Does that answer that piece? Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Some of our models, just the MEP side of stuff, will get up to 150, 200 meg.
Sure.
How is performance with saving compared to doing it to our local server that's not necessarily over the WAN, but I mean, is the performance comparable?
Does it suck or is it good, right? That's is it
delay.
So we had a question earlier today about 800 meg model, and we've talked to some of our beta testers that are working on fairly large projects. One of the projects they're working on is over 500 megs, and they're seeing load times to central reload latest somewhere between 2 and 2.5 minutes. That's not on a big line either. That's 5 meg lines. So the answer is the performance is certainly going to vary office to office.
Right.
But we think the performance is far beyond some of what people are seeing with Revit Server, and we feel very comfortable that we can compete with WAN acceleration solutions as well. So to answer your question, while tap dancing a little bit, I think it's much better. And all 5 of our beta testers, 3 of which were using Revit Server, have abandoned Revit Server altogether and are migrating to Collaboration Revit for all projects.
But is that based on all the extra
No, it's based
stuff
on,
or based on
most of 2 of the companies didn't even install Communicator because they use Link in Office. They're simply using it for A360's cloud connection. That's another. So this Communicator piece, you don't have to install that, by the way. So if you have restrictions on communication, you don't have to install that component.
So what happens to Revit Server?
It's a good question. I think Revit Server stays intact. We're going to continue to support it because we find some firms do find that to be an incredibly suitable solution, especially in scenarios where security comes into play and there's questions about whether or not A360 will satisfy those. We think that it will, but obviously we need customers to come to those conclusions. So.
Did you acquire this technology, or
We
did you
didn't.
develop
We
it?
didn't. This is developed. So.
Do you have to do the same kind of maintenance tasks you have to do with a?
As far as compression and things like that?
Yeah, like sometimes you have to rebuild your central model. And
Sure. So in most cases, you'll notice that actually when you go to open, all of your compression and audit features are disabled. They show up as missing. However, you can compress and audit inside of A360. One of the things they are working on is automating some of that as well. So the ability to have that on a schedule, as an example, so automatically compresses. Yeah.
But they're going to see.
But yes, you do. There are still some maintenance components. Yeah.
Do you see this being used as an architect owning the model and putting it out there on the cloud and working with their MEP and their structural and everybody and everyone working off that one central model where everything's all stored together?
Right.
And then as a second part of that, if an architect does want to work in that way, who has to purchase the skyscraper stuff? Is it just the architect, or is every firm that is involved to purchase that?
It's based on the user account,
Based
so
on the user
everybody would
accounts.
be.
Anyone that's going to
right.
be acting in that collaboration mode, I should say, anyone that wants to act in that collaboration mode needs to have a license.
Okay.
With that being said, in a scenario where your current, let's say let's say your mechanical engineer was, we're fine, there's only 2 of us, we're not moving to collaboration forever, we're not taking on any additional costs. That doesn't prevent you from taking on the collaboration from Revit tool. They can still host that model in that A360 account as a link, regardless of whether or not they have collaboration for Revit. And you can link from that account. So I guess to go in reverse, to answer your last question first, the answer is no, you don't have, not everyone on the team is going to have the license unless they want the collaboration component. With that being said, your entire architectural team would need it, because if they're all going to work in the same central model, they're going to need that access. But if they're working from a linked model or something like that, then the answer is no. To go back to your first question though, do I see everyone working in one complete central model as opposed to everyone linking in their different models? I think that's a totally project-based question. If you're working with a partner that you have really great trust in and you're not worried about them creating issues within your architectural components, and even from a mechanical standpoint, you feel comfortable that you can host against their objects or against their reference planes, go for it. But I think we all know the limitations that go along with that, and ultimately every project's different. So for the moment, I have seen a few firms, specifically HVAC and ARC, starting to work together in some settings. Electrical and plumbing, not quite as much, but HVAC I'm starting to see play with ARCs a little bit more commonly. I still think for the moment though, you're going to see people working in their separate models. Okay. If only for file size. Was that answer?
Yep.
Okay. Was there another one in there? Or did I get
Nope, that's it.
Right. Other questions? Yeah. Oops. Go ahead.
Okay. So when we've worked with Revit in the past, we tended to keep a kind of an insulation between the architect and us. So even if we had the ability to get, and this was an MEP firm, if we had the ability to get the latest version of the architect's model all the time, we would not link into it live. We'd do some cleanup on the version that they sent us, and we'd make sure that we had good records over what version we were working from.
Sure.
Does this work in this scenario, or I'm picturing this being architect posts their model and then it's linked to ours the next time we open it up.
That can be the workflow if you want. You also have the ability to do what's called a copy feature, so you can copy the architectural model and save it against a version that you've already copied. So if you wanted to do that on a weekly basis, you could still do that. That's really selectively, that's up to you on that type of a workflow. But we can empower either scenario. So, but yeah, that's.
Yeah, they don't like it when we move the ceiling 7 times.
Well, I think architecturally,
because we're just pointing with views.
Then we'll clean it up, because I mean we'll delete sheets, we'll delete the stuff we don't need to make that file smaller to help our performance.
Right. Yeah. And architecturally speaking, if you're working on 2 or 3 design options, or if you're maybe in a phase-based approach, whatever the case may be, you may not want to share a specific version of that model. So that's where we get into these hubs, and some of the hubs might be. As an example, architecture firm A, you have a hub. Or mechanical firm mechanical firm B, you have a hub. Your hubs are completely internal until you decide to make them external, if you will. It really depends on the partner you're engaged with and what that communication line is, right? I mean, we've met with several firms even today that they have complete confidence with their partnership with their MEP team, as an example, or their ARC team, or their structural team. So they want to just do instant sharing. We've had others that don't trust them for anything, right? So either scenario, we're able to accommodate. Other questions? That's it. Sorry.
Is there a cost associated with the file size?
Right. With file size, no. File size has no bearing on cost. In fact, at AU, one of the things that was brought up by both our staff as well as, I guess you could call them competitors, but really just other repositories. The cost of data is just really going to 0 at this point. For anyone that has a Dropbox account, you probably noticed that when you renewed, your data went from 50 gigs to 2 terabytes or something like that. I mean, data is really, it's just becoming so inexpensive. For us, data storage is not a way to profit. Fortunately, right? But no, it's just not. It's not a profit center. So for us, it's not a driver. The only cost associated to collaboration for Revit is the per user cost. The other cost on A360 would be for things like cloud credits. So if you were going to do cloud-based rendering or cloud-based energy analysis, those are the other two pieces that are there.
There's a lot of new things that's been added to Revit with
Sure.
this. And I do a fair amount of programming. Is there an API that's supported behind this also? I can't think of anything specific where I'd want to automate, but you never know.
There is, yeah. There is an API behind both our Communicate tab as well as our Communicator, so the way that linking occurs. And there's a company called SkySync that's actually, SkySync's an application they're working on, I should say, with Autodesk. And they're working on things like, for instance, Dropbox integration and FTP integration. So there is an API. I know absolutely nothing about it, but there is that on the back end. But certainly if you have questions about it, we can work towards those. I just don't know much about it.
Listening to these guys sharing models, is there ways to say, when he links my model in from architecture, he only gets what he needs, doesn't need all that drafting view crap?
Sure, yeah.
Is there a way to automate that so when he gets a live link, we say, okay, go link it?
Right now, the only
having to clean it up.
Right now, the only administrative tool from a linking standpoint is you can restrict people from downloading the native Revit file. They can only link the Revit file. If they try to bind the link, it'll actually give them an error. But we are working on administrative tools that allow you to restrict what information they can receive. So as an example, it might only be the 3D model. We are working on some of those things. Again, I don't have a release date on a lot of that.
Because that would.
We're aware of that as a
detail
deal.
with space.
And that might answer some of the earlier question too about cleaning up that model prior to it being shared, obviously. So, so yeah, that's certainly an opportunity.
Back up and archive. What do you have out there for me? Because right now I'm backing up all those models multiple times per day, daily, weekly,
All day long.
monthly.
So right now, version controls on every save, every sync to central. But we have heard multiple people talk about the benefit of what if it automated saving a weekly version or a daily version at the conclusion or at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock p.m. Our development team is very perceptive to that concept. It's just a matter of adding it as a feature. Today, it versions every single sync. You can, just like with a log file, you can specify how many it creates, whether it's 10, 20, or 30. So every time there's a sync, it creates that version. That's our version.
A good API need might be to get in there and suck those models out on the schedule and store them on your network.
Yeah, that would be that certainly would be an opportunity. The A360 piece is going to be tougher. It's a web interface, but certainly if there was a way to have the archival from Central, that could be a really cool opportunity.
What kind of options did you have? You showed the sheet earlier.
Yeah.
Is there a way to? What other options, I guess, was there with that? Can you save that directly out as a PDF, or is there?
Yep,
do you have to do that from the Revit side, or can you do that from? So
today it says either save as or a print. So you can do a print feature, print to PDF. I think that's what most people are going to move forward with, is a print to PDF. Our save as features, I think at one time it said PDF and now it doesn't. So I don't know what the long-term plan is from that standpoint. It says DWF right now, but obviously we know who won that war. So PDF is probably ultimately your print method.
We go with what we're requested.
Yeah, exactly.
What's this? Are they thinking about getting a security status to your cloud?
Yeah, we have
military type stuff.
So we currently have a website dedicated to our server system, all around security. We're working on certification with a lot of different groups, but we've already gotten GSA approval, Veterans Affairs approval, and several HIPAA groups as well. So we're working on that right now, but we're doing it through Amazon. So Amazon's our server storage center, and they're more diligent about they're the most diligent about security as far as server maintenance goes, at least from our vantage point. They hammer us on things. So yeah, we understand that requirement, but we could forward that website if needed. Yeah. Right.
So from the security perspective, as an administrator, I can prevent Chris from giving a link to that model to somebody outside of our group.
So we do have the ability to restrict export. Yeah, so if we didn't want to invite additional candidates and or allow a specific user to email to another email address, we have that ability as well. Okay. The other thing that's nice is we can track download traffic. So we can track if someone downloaded 300 gigs from our standards template, so we know what firm they're moving on to. That's sort of the nice piece about that, right? So we can track all of that data. Other items? I don't get to do this piece because we usually run out of time, but I have 7 minutes, so I'm going to show you one thing, if that's all right. On the Analyze tab, I just want to point this out. what's nice about this feature I'm about to show you is I don't have the project I'm going to demo open. For those of you that aren't aware, we added some new features for energy analysis as well as for lighting analysis. We added some new tools. The lighting analysis tool, you can actually download an add-in. And if some of you have seen this, I'm sorry for retreading it, but I want to show it anyways. The lighting analysis tool, if you are familiar with the lighting analysis tool out of Ecotect, it has some similarities to that. We've completely overhauled it, but there are some similarities. The other one is a beta project. So I'm going to go ahead and do what's called a results and comparison. It's going to prompt green build right here on screen for me. And what's nice is within this, I can have multiple projects live at any time. The one thing I want to point out to you are these two beta projects. One is Project Salon. And what's nice about this project is it gives us dashboards related to the energy of this specific building. So it runs a quick energy analysis, and it tells us things both about the site, so these are some site-based analysis, and it also gives us energy cost. So what's interesting about our energy cost window is that this is all based on the NextGen 2020 energy codes that we're putting into position. And the cost that you see here, this mean cost, sort of looks like a nest. It actually kind of operates that way. I'm going to make some alterations to this building from a data standpoint, not parametrically. I'm not going to move the model. I'm not going to sub out different families. I'm simply going to take a look at what would happen if I were to adjust the building orientation as an example. So I'll do this, kind of adjust the building orientation. You'll notice by simply adjusting the building orientation, it's going to tell me what the cost savings are yearly as I start to make these adjustments. So as I'm moving through, I've got this unhappy face, and unfortunately this guy doesn't get happier because this building's just in trouble. But as I make changes, I'm going to go ahead and move a few other items. Just as an example, we'll slightly adjust wall insulation, move roof insulation to where it makes sense. Window glass, you'll notice as I'm making the adjustments, it's telling me, as an example, I could go to a quad, LOE, DL.
Right.
Be pretty ridiculous window. But as I'm doing that, you'll notice it's quickly reducing the cost. Now what's important about this, at least the way it was explained to me at Greenbuild, is we would never be able to get that approved in a budget line item, right? I mean, that would just not happen. If you have an opportunity to watch our keynote from last week, one of the things that they brought up is this idea of generative design. We're not like some companies that have brought up generative design. We know that a software can't design a building as well as an architect or an engineer. But ultimately, we understand that there's different factors that might play into how we design that building. So part of what they're working on is, what happens if at an early design phase, we take into consideration things like project orientation, sunshades. We start thinking about these on a much earlier scale. So instead of when we try to hit platinum at the very end, if we try to hit platinum at the beginning, right? If we try to sort of make those gestures very early in the design phase, what that might look like. So it's worth noting that everything I'm showing you here, this team is also teamed with a product called Formit. And for those of you that aren't familiar with it, Formit has some familiarity to a product like SketchUp. It's a free-form modeling tool. We don't view it as a SketchUp replacement. Ultimately, the way we see it as a way to do quick conceptual design that'll assist with energy modeling. So these two teams are working in tandem. And if you have an opportunity, go ahead and watch Carl's keynote. It's all available and live. Some really cool stuff on there. But he talks a lot about the value of generative design and how it might play long-term with some of our energy analysis tools. There was also an AU session last week on energy modeling, produced by the Autodesk teams. We brought in external partners, architectural firms, and we really showed you what our long-term vision is. Those are two really great meetings or events or training sessions that I would tell you to watch. Just Google energy modeling analysis, I think, under our AU 2014 class lectures list. You'll see it. It's got a big A symbol on it. It's one of the keynotes. But I would encourage you to take a look at both of those. 3 minutes, so I'll say thank you very much for letting me talk and present. Hopefully it wasn't too boring and you learned some cool stuff. If you have any questions, I'll stay around so you can come up and berate me or do whatever you need to. But thank you very much. I really appreciate the time. I look forward to coming back out here again. So thank you.
So how does the whole tablet phone fit into this whole? Is that you have the ability to kind of view that same stuff since it's web-based?
Everything I did on the A360 viewer, everything I did, I can do on the iPad, including that explode feature where it blows the model up. I can look through sheets.
Because it's all web-based.
All web-based, but it is an app with the iPhone or with the iPad. I believe it's an app now with Android as well.
Is that available?
Yeah, it performs really well, actually. So my son, right before I got out here, decided to use my iPad as his work computer and disabled it. He's 3, so he didn't know what he was up to. But I was trying to get it to operate. I actually like using that for demoing A360 more so than my computer. I think the app runs faster than the browser. And the app doesn't require Wi-Fi, so if I download that data on my iPad, I can view it when I'm out in the field, as an example.
The actual, is there like a markup tool in the apps?
The right now that AutoCAD 360 app, the markup tool's only there, but the plan is for it to make it. We thought it was going to be there in AU, so any day. We're waiting for the trigger. So you used Design Review before? Have you ever had a chance with that? It's similar from
We've got some teams that love using Design Review and EWS. We've got some that say no, we'd rather use PDF. It's just kind of based on what your client is requesting.
Our biggest pain point